Hello, everyone. Today we have Dr. Bhaskar Chatterjee with us. First of all, thank you so much for taking out time, sir, and coming on REACHA Dialogues. I really appreciate you taking out time for this. Firstly, I would like to start with giving a quick introduction about you to the audience, and then we can get started. So Dr. Bhaskar Chatterjee has been a former Secretary to Government of India. He was an Indian Administrative Service officer from the 1975 batch of Orissa cadre. Um, Throughout his career, he's held many distinguished positions, and Dr. Chatterjee retired as Secretary to Government of India in 2011, and then he went on to become Director General and CEO of Indian Institute of Corporate Affairs, IICF, from 2011 to 2016. Sir has been instrumental in framing and issuing the CSR guidelines, corporate social responsibility guidelines for public sector enterprises in 2010. He's also played the most fundamental role in the inclusion of Section 135 in Companies Act 2013 on CSR and the rules and notifications thereof. He then has been extensively monitoring and keeping a track on the rollout of CSR in our country, and even when he was at IICA, which was from 2014 to 2016. Dr. Chatterjee has written and lectured over many years on issues of social and sustainable development, corporate responsibility, and human resources. So firstly, thank you so much, sir, again, for coming on this initiative.
Thank you. Wonderful to be with you.
Thank you, sir. Just to begin with, I would like to quickly give you an introduction about this initiative, what I'm trying to do, and then we can get into the questions that we have for you. So basically, the reason why I have started this blog, which is called REACHA Dialogues, is basically to get people from all around who have had different diverse experiences. And through these learnings that are coming out of these stories, us younger people today, if we can, listen to your stories and experiences, there's so much for us to learn from you all. So your learnings, if absorbed by us in the right way, in our personal or professional capacity, can help us make our lives more meaningful. Again, the goal is, try to figure out what makes you happy so that the given limited time that we have, we're happy and we're leading something which has meaning to it. Um, yeah, so that was it, sir. And so let's get started. I have a few topics that we can touch upon, and which I'm also personally inquisitive about, and also I'm sure a lot of people my age also would love to know on these things. So firstly, sir, so what inspired you to become an IS officer?
Yeah. Since you are actually doing this program sitting in the States, the letter IAS may be somewhat strange to them. It's the Indian Administrative Service. As you know, we were ruled by a colonial power for almost 200 years. But one of the great things that they left behind for us to follow, and which we have not deviated from all of these years, is what you call a permanent civil service. This civil service is recruited from the best universities of the country. They are identified at a very early age, usually when they're about 23, 24. And the recruitment, which happens at the national level, has a civil service examination. Almost 500,000 young boys and girls take that examination. Only about 100 make it. So you can see that the ratio is very, very small. And those who do are then blooded into the service. They usually spend about 35, 36 years of their lives serving the nation. And they get a chance to do that both at the level of the state as well as at the central level. Um, at the state level, they occupy positions which are very deep down into localities. So we begin at the very bottom of the ladder when we actually are working in subdivisions in small, remote areas of the country And the idea was that the civil service should really know what life is like at the grassroots level. And for about 10 years, what we do is that we go from subdivision to district and then learn administration at the grassroots level, try and change the lives of people who are marginalized, who are poor. And then when you finished about 10 years of service, you come into the policy making level at the secretariat. And one of the things that really inspired me, and this is to address your question, is what can you do for your nation in terms of its development, in terms of its economy, in terms of how it goes forward, in terms of how you can provide an inclusive agenda for the nation, what you can do for the downtrodden, the marginalized, the poor. And the IAS gives you a tremendous shot at that. It gives you the powers, it gives you the capacity, it gives you the capability, it trains you, it develops you, it strongly influences your psyche, your mindset. And the way the training is devised, the way the postings are made, is to enable a young person to look at the ideals that he or she may have, the ideals that drive you, to do something really substantial, visible, real for your nation's development. That is part one. The other part, I think, has also to come from the guidance that you receive from your parents. My father was very much in the private sector. He was a CEO, and so all of that that goes with the private sector. He always felt that yes, all right, the private sector is where it is. But to be in government and to be at the highest echelons of the civil service, where you get into real policy making, where you determine, develop, and deliver real public policy, is something where he always wanted his eldest son to be in. And it's not always that we accept what our fathers tell us. But I felt that if that's the way he wanted me to develop, it's a wonderful way to go. And if that's what he had set out before me, then why not? So these two things, parental guidance and my own inner feeling that I must lead a meaningful life, meaningful in the sense of doing something substantial, real, tangible for my country.
That's a really good answer. Thank you so much for sharing that. There's a lot of good information in just that one answer. So you also mentioned that you worked so many years in your service, which is about 30 years. So what were some of the departments which you thought got you really close to the community, like on the ground, where you could actually come very close with the people, and slowly that started also would have instilled like the feelings about sustainability and the importance of it even more in you when you saw it?
There are three positions that I think every IAS officer cherishes the most when he looks back on his innings. And I stayed in the service for 36 years. Of those three positions, the one chance you get is called the collector and district magistrate. India is, of course, at the central level, it has its ministries. At the state level, it had its departments. But one below the state are the administrative units known as districts, which is a geographical territory. Typically, a state has something between 20 to 30 districts. And in that geographical space, when you become the district magistrate, you literally are the one person that determines everything that happens in that district. You are the chief district officer. So whether it's development, whether it's law and order, whether it's changing people's lives, and you have a large manpower availability to enable you to take the actions that you feel need to be taken. There are a host of government schemes that the DM sits on top of, and a very large budget which enables him to actualize those schemes on the ground. So whether it's drinking water, whether it's village roads, whether it's village infrastructure, whether it's women's empowerment, whether it's skill development, any issue that touches people's lives, it's the DM who has to be there, uh, you know, to get things going. There's also another part that he or she plays in a big way, and that is when disaster strikes, natural disasters, floods, famine, drought. The DM leads from the front. He is the face of the administration, the face of government, and he needs to take the reins of all that happens in his or her hands. So the public too sees the DM as a public figure. So, along with the political representatives, who are very often members of the Legislative Assembly, the MLAs as we call them, the members of Parliament, the MPs as we call them, in tandem and in conjunction with them, the political side and the administrative side, they are responsible for everything that happens in the district. And that, for a young officer, we become DMs within about 6 years of service. So, around the age of 30, we are invested and imbued with really enormous power. And with those powers, of course, come immense responsibility. So there are absolutely no limits to the work you can do. It's a 24/7, 365 job. That is a life changing experience. Thereafter, a few years down the line, you come to a ministry or a department, and this could be at the state or at the central level. And at the age of around, say, 42, 43, you become the cutting edge of that department or the ministry. In short, you then coordinate everything that that department or that ministry has to offer. For example, when I was a joint secretary, I was also the director general of the National Literacy Mission. And the task was that India had been bedeviled by very low literacy levels, particularly among women. At the time, I remember in 1996, when I became the Director General of our National Literacy Mission, India's literacy percentage was just 51. And the percentage of literacy among women was around 35, 36. I mean, that's how, even in 1996, India had such a large gap in reading and writing just basic language skills. That's the level of illiteracy that prevailed in our country. Today, of course, it's gone up to beyond 76 now. So between 1996 and 2020, a substantial change has happened. You feel very happy that you, in the 5 years that you were Joint Secretary, you could contribute to something as important as that in a very real life way. You had the powers, you had the manpower to deliver that change. So when you go back, you see the Joint Secretary as the second thing that you do in your life that really changes things, you and everything around you. And finally, 2 or 3 years before you lay down office, you become a secretary in the government of India. And that is the highest policy level position that you occupy. And there you influence, you write, you develop, you generate public policy. And of course, I did a lot of that. But the one thing that you talked about that made a significant difference in my life was to bring or usher in the modern era of corporate social responsibility in India. And from there on, of course, I never looked back.
So it's very interesting how you also mentioned that throughout the journey, like there's so many times when you face a disaster, you need to know exactly how to deal with it. And could you touch upon the time when the economic crisis hit around in 2009, and you also had a big involvement around that area? So when something like that struck India, what at that point did you feel, and how, like, were you thinking, how did you approach that during that time?
I was extremely fortunate. I really didn't have any what you might call formal economic training. But at the time that the global economic crisis hit us in that period, 2007, 8, 9, I was blooded into what was then known as the Planning Commission, now known as Niti Aayog. Dr. Manmohan Singh, our Prime Minister, was the chairman. This is the highest economic policy making body of the country. Dr. Manmohan Singh, the Prime Minister of the country at the time, he was the chairman of the Planning Commission. But we also had an internationally very, very famous economist who had worked in the World Bank as well, Montek Singh Ahluwalia, very widely known, and people in the US would relate to his name instantly. He was the deputy chairman of the Planning Commission. So, on a day to day basis, it is he who ran the Planning Commission. Below him, there's a secretary who does the day to day work. And that happened to be a very, very senior officer from my cadre, the Orissa cadre, Mr. Subhash Pani. So when he assumed that role, he looked around for somebody who would be, literally his staff officer, somebody who could work very closely with him on the team that Dr. Montek Aluwalia was building. So he brought me into the Planning Commission. This was 2008, right at the very heart of the economic crisis. So I became part of that central, very small economic team, working directly with the Prime Minister and some of the best economic minds of the country. So, what kind of stimulus package should we give? How do we pump prime the economy? How much liquidity should we generate? Should we jack up public spending in order to ensure that we have more jobs and we have more investment, government investment, to give the economy a quick boost? And the sectors that were really hard hit, like the realty sector, you would remember 2007-8, the economic crisis was mostly realty, underlined centric kind of crisis. So how do we develop policies to ensure that they didn't just go under? All of that thinking, and then not just thinking, but translating all of that thinking into actual action. Uh, Developing the policy, declaring that policy, and then getting that policy going. So those two budgets, of course, of the years 2007 and 8, and then of course 2009 also were very, very important. And India, it's recorded history now. India was one of those countries that came out of that economic crisis with a tremendous amount of glory. So I was very happy to be part of that team.
Yeah. One more question might be on like a bit personal level. So when the economy is like under stressed conditions, we as people, like we're under so much stress and pressure. But someone like you who is actually on the ground level with dealing with policy, and you're trying to see how, you can get this economy back up again. At that moment, like I'm sure those are stressful situations for people who are making the policies too. Like how do you keep your mind calm at that in those kind of situations where you have been in high pressure situations, and so that you can, without any other hindrance, you can do what's required.
Yeah, this is a very good question. And sometimes when you are really stressed, really worried, really concerned, because it's a whole lot of things that hit you. One is your professional competence, which of course is always there. It's very, very severely challenged at times of crisis. But then also your internal psyche about what I'm doing is going to actually affect very strong the lives of millions of people. Every word you write you into that policy document, you think many, many times what will be the effect when it's rolled out at the ground level. Here am I sitting in the Planning Commission building, New Delhi, one room, just me, the computer, and I am writing that policy. It's going to affect millions of lives. The kind of responsibility that comes on you is really hard. I think somewhere, and I don't know whether this resonates with everyone, but there is an underlying spirituality somewhere, some faith of any kind that you need to turn to. So I remember that my faith stood me in very strong regard. I internalized, I looked deep into myself. I spent at least 5 or 7 minutes with my maker, whoever that be. And a strong lesson that I'd like to give to younger people also is, however little time they find, keep that faith in you really going through your life. It will stand you in tremendous stead. Now I have more time, so I devote a little more time to my faith. But even when one is challenged at the in one's youth, if you hang on to some faith, some belief, and you devote a small portion of your time to nurturing that faith and belief, and holding on to it, whoever, whatever, however tangible, intangible that faith may be, but hang in there, believe in that, and that will shore up your belief in yourself.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that's definitely really valuable. Post IAS, sir, you mentioned that your involvement and your interest towards corporate social responsibility and the area of sustainability started increasing a lot. So can we first like touch upon what really got you into this field, and then secondly, how did this interest really lead you to actually end up developing the entire like, CSR ecosystem in India?
As they say, and thereby hangs a tale. When I came in from the planning commission, I was at the level of additional secretary. I got promoted to the level of secretary. The economic clouds had begun to be dispelled by then. And government positioned me in the Ministry of Heavy Industry and Public Enterprises with specific charge of all public sector enterprises. And surely by accident, frankly, if you'd asked me when I got that position, what is CSR? And I would have asked you, maybe you can expand that acronym for me because I don't even know what it fully means. But there was this very slim file that landed on my desk on one fateful day. It just had 2 pages in it. And somebody said there that, for public sector enterprises who are created for public good, how can we channelize that element of public good into something substantial, measurable? How can we develop a strategy in the area of corporate social responsibility? And I had a lot of other things on my table. So I just set that aside and I said, maybe one Saturday or something, when I have more time to look and reflect, I'll come back. And so maybe 2, 3, 4 weeks later, when I sitting at my desk on a Saturday and said, hey, this little file waiting for my attention, let me take a look. And as I read, I developed the understanding that that was such a powerful tool to enable, what shall I say, corporates to enter into the arena of what was then just pure and simple philanthropy. So being generous, giving, and then of course translating that into giving back. How does one go about it from the corporate perspective? A corporate is largely driven by shareholders' wealth realization. What can shareholders? How can shareholders maximize the returns they get on their investment? And what is it that the bottom line delivers at the end of the day? And of course, they don't wait for that. They do the quarterly reviews. So every 3 months, your financials are out there, and the stock market and how it, you know, fluctuates or does better or worse. All of that is the corporate life. Where is the giving in that? And why should there be a giving? You rationalize. Is it necessary for you to give back? At the end of the day, you're paying taxes. And the better you do, the more profits you make, the more taxes are collected by government. So looking after the poor, marginalized, is the government's job. That's why we're paying taxes to them. Why should we dip our toes into that? Is a question that's frequently asked. And I ask myself this question a million times. But then this was also the era when across the globe, people were asking really hard questions from the leadership of companies and saying that in your profit orientation, in the way you make your money, the kind of harm you do to people and to the planet is absolutely criminal. And you must be responsible and held responsible for all the damage that you do and for the greed that you so, you know, just adopt without a care in the world. And this movement was growing then across civil society, across the planet, across the world, even among economists. And the whole concept of cruel capitalism was developing day by day. In the public sector, though, that was not so much a reality. It was largely government controlled, and as you know, Mudit, we had all of this legacy of the socialist era. So we had a creaking public sector, overstaffed, mollycoddled, and sort of government protected kind of situation. So my task was, how do we make them more competitive? How do we bring down unnecessary manpower? How do we make it more lean? And where do we establish our deliverables and so on and so forth? So in that process, I got the CMDs of a large number of the public sectors together, and I said, look, you guys do a lot of stuff where you say you do good to society. And everybody said, yes, sir, of course we do. And I said, well, then let's develop a system by which you can report it, you can analyze it, you can measure what impact it's having. And would you be on board on that? Of course, initially they were hesitant, but soon with their assistance and their help, we began to strategize, develop. And then on the 1st of April 2010, it remains a historic document. We were able to bring out the first ever guidelines anywhere in the world on corporate social responsibility for the public sector.
It's very interesting, sir, how this model of giving back can also happen in the corporate sector, because a lot of times you just see corporates trying to, figure out ways where they can maximize on their cash reserves. But then actually, if you can fit in, if you can make it like a requirement, it can truly lead all the corporates towards making things around them like more sustainable in nature. So definitely one of a kind. And now it's been 7 years since this law has been passed and since you first started working on this. Do you think, like, what do you think has been the journey so far? Do you think has it been uh like the impact has been good, or like what do you think about the journey for like of 7 years up until now?
Again, some accidents of history, let's call it that, change your life and change in some ways the way the nation progresses. When I was laying down my office in the public sector domain after about 2.5 years, the time came to retire. And then, of course, all of CSR had remained in the public sector.
Mhm.
So, what about corporates? What about the private sector per se? How would they come in? And again, another accident of history that when I finished and I retired, government still did not let go of my services. They positioned me as Director General of the Indian Institute of Corporate Affairs. And that is when I retired in 2011 and I began to work on that document, which finally became a reality in 2013. This was known as the Companies Act. So the way that companies were going to be regulated was on the anvil as a public policy document. And the then Secretary of Corporate Affairs said to me that, Dr. Chatterjee, we want to have one section. There are 470 sections in that Companies Act of 2013. And he said, we're going to draft one section, just one, devoted to CSR and help us, develop it. And that's how the drafting of Section 135 began. Because for the private sector, you can't have government guidelines. It has to be legislation. So we drafted that very historic Section 135, and finally, the Companies Act got passed in December of 2013, a full 2 years after I had retired, but I was still with government. This legislation then was actualized from the 1st of April, which is our financial year, 2014. Now, 2014, 2021, 7 years have passed. I remember that if you were to put up a dartboard in the corporate sector chief's corner office across India, that dartboard would have a picture of me on it because I was everybody's favorite whipping boy, saying, "Look at this bureaucrat. He sits in the air-conditioned comfort of some bhavan somewhere or the other, and he drafts legislation, and he's telling the private sector to actually give, and not just tell. He's making it mandatory." And so I became known as the 2% man, the father of CSR, the person who said, "Come on, out of the profits that you make, give 2% back to society." And not this is not an appeal that you give back, but what you would need to do to give back, and how would you be transparent in the way you're giving back, so that your not just the shareholders, but the stakeholders, society at large, could ask you, all right, you made a profit of 10 rupees. The 2 rupees that you're supposed to give back, how did you give back? Tell us. Put it on your website. At the annual general meeting, we're going to ask you, what did you do with that 2%? Did it go back to your family or your aunt or your favorite cousin? What did you do with that money? And the legislation also put it was a board-driven legislation. In short, every single decision that you took on CSR could not be the CMD's decision, the CEO's decision. It had to be the decision of the board. And we made a CSR committee of the board, a 3-member committee with an independent director. So at every board meeting, whatever that company has done or proposes to do in CSR is an item on the board's agenda, needs to be addressed. And in the annual report of your company, what you have done with CSR needs to be placed in the annual report. So it was a legislation that not only allowed you to do things, but needed you to be transparent on how you did it. What you did, where you did, how you did, needed now to be on the, in the public domain. So there was no getting out of it.
Yeah.
And that's how things really, really changed.
Yeah. Thank you again for sharing this. So I've realized like people like me, like younger people in stressful and situations with high pressure, and when you're trying to do something and you have a lot of opposition from other people around you, a lot of times we don't really have enough will or courage to overcome that and keep, have faith in ourselves. Again, you touched upon faith earlier, but now the very little that you have shared from throughout the years, that you have done so much worth of like 30 years worth of work, which I don't even know how you can even possibly share that to someone. But whatever you could share, it's just so much. So there must have been so many, like times where you faced, again, challenging times, people opposing you, people not very happy with, what you were saying and things like that. So basically you're down and challenging times, if you may call it. um, how did you deal with that? Like, in first of all, you had so much high pressure already with the work you were doing, and now you have external factors coming into. What were some of the things that you think helped you deal with these kind of challenging like situations around you?
Well, I think the most important part is to have a very strong sense of self belief and to say that irrespective of how many people out there are pointing fingers at you, you believe in your mission. You've got to rationalize it to yourself and say, and of course, understand where the criticism is coming from. Uh, it could actually be coming from people whose interests are hurt, and there's a reason why they come at you for that. It could come from uninformed criticism from your rivals and people who would love to pull you down. There's a second source of criticism. But these motivations you know, okay? And you try to distance yourself. It's like modern day trolling. And if you're doing something worthwhile, you're going to be trolled. And how much would you let the trolling affect you? But there is a third thing, and that stood me in really good stead, which is what you call informed criticism, constructive criticism. And there is a small group out there. There is a small group who are actually not dissuading you from doing what you're doing, but questioning you in a very constructive way and saying, Dr. Chatterjee, this is all right, but then this looks a little off color. I mean, couldn't you fine tune this? I mean, whereas the objective is all right, but the rationale in what you're doing is not coming through. Corporates are taking this as a challenge. Can't you make them see that as an opportunity? Can't you tell them that if they give back and they come clean on how they give back, won't it do wonders for their public image? Won't it do wonders for their brand name? Can you deliver that message differently? Why you coming across as a hard-boiled bureaucrat who believes in the semicolons and the commas that you write are the only ones that matter? They don't. Come across as a far more humane person. Go out there and defend yourself in the public domain. Go around the country, speak at public platform, get invited by corporates, by the civil society sector, answer their queries, be at the forefront, answer the questions honestly. And where you can't, ask them to give you feedback.
That's
And
perfect.
so before we brought that legislation, for about a year and a half, the corporate affairs minister and I, we toured the length and breadth of the country. We must have met hundreds of corporate sector executives, hundreds and thousands of civil society sector activists, and so on. And we took a lot of suggestions from them. Finally, when we hardwired the law, it had the involvement of a lot of them, and we assuaged many of their doubts and difficulties. And we said that government's attitude towards you is not something that's going to be, if you don't do, we punish. If you don't do, we jail. If you don't do, we fine. That's not the way CSR is public good. What we're asking you to do is to do something for the society of which you are a part, your families are a part, your employees are a part. What's wrong? Why wouldn't you not want to do it? Tell us. And when you put it that way,
Yeah,
the message is delivered differently.
definitely. Again, thanks so much for sharing this. One last question for you, and you can answer this in a very few words. Um, for someone who's listening this, there's been a lot of movement on the area of CSR, as we can see, in the news, and a lot of people are getting excited to be a part of it. They're getting more than excited. Younger people are getting curious as to what is CSR, how can they make their way in. A lot of times, people are not sure if this can be something which can be taken up as a career, or this is something, a lot of times they think it's volunteering, where you have to be working for a company and you have to volunteer. For someone like this, what would you advise? What's like the right place to start, like for someone who is interested but they're not really sure what uh, what this is about yet?
Okay, very briefly, there are two things I'd like to say. One is, if you are a startup or a creator or a CEO or a leader of an existing company, then your mindset as to, okay, from the profits that I make, if I don't make any profits, there's not much I can do. But if I'm making fairly healthy profits, can I set aside a small sum for doing good, maybe in my neighborhood, maybe around me, maybe from the village that I come from. Oh, maybe I can go back to my roots and say, hey, there are a lot of people out there who, now that I'm making profits, why can't I do something for them? Maybe a small geographic region, maybe a small ethnic community, whatever touches your heart. Maybe the handicapped, maybe just the poor, maybe feeding programs, whatever, wherever, however small, even if it is just a few bucks, it doesn't matter. Start somewhere. But don't do this intermittently. Hey, I'm feeling good today. The weather is outside is wonderful. Let's do some CSR. What the whole CSR law is about is that you strategize. It becomes strategic CSR. It becomes part of your company. So you have some small element of your company looking at that aspect of your work regularly, always, and trying to better how they do it. This is part one. The other part is that if you're an employee, and there are now many companies who have active CSR programs, and many of them do it in a cross-cutting way. It's not just about the CSR department of a company. Many enlightened CEOs actually try to develop CSR in the DNA of the company. They encourage employees to give time, to get involved with the projects that the company is undertaking. They have regular exposures with CSR department. The chiefs of CSR speak to employees at monthly meetings and so on. So there is a culture of giving and giving back that is being developed in many companies. Get involved with that. And then develop your own feeling about what you want to do and how you want to do it. But just get involved with it first.
Excellent. So I think that's all that I had from my side. Thank you so much for answering everything so patiently and in such a detailed manner. Every answer has so much information, like so many lessons for all of us.
Thank you, Mudit. It's been a pleasure talking to you. And
Again,
I must laud your efforts. You must keep up this blog, keep it going. And I wish you all the very best from my side.
thank you, and you also take care. Thank you so much again. Thank you.